What's up YouTube? So today we are continuing our journey into minimal tech sounds, and I'm going to show you how I made this lead sound. So the sound itself is pretty simple, like the patch, but the magic is in how you articulate it, how you play the modulation and that kind of thing, and I want to discuss what that is. So yeah, let's dive into Vital. We can create the patch from scratch, and then I'm going to show you kind of like what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we have a basic init patch in Vital, and like I said, the actual basics of the sound is really simple. It's basically just like a saw wave with some detune. The magic is in how we play the sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign a bunch of different parameters to the mod wheel, and then we're going to play with the mod wheel and the pitch wheel as the sound is sequenced. And that's what kind of gives it the magic in this sound. So first and foremost, the kind of basics of the sound is two saw waves. One of them is full voices of unison, and then we're only going to detune it a very slight amount here, 2%. The first voice, we want to set the phase randomization down to 0, so we've got a solid base to start with, and then any of the kind of detuned voices will be randomized. So we also want to detune the pitch of this saw wave a little bit over here, but notice how when you change the tuning of the saw wave, it kind of gives it this kind of almost distorted sound, which obviously becomes more apparent when we distort the sound, but this is what we're going to, one of the parameters that we're going to assign to the mod wheel. So just for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play the sound and then tweak this detune over here, or the fine tune amount. And you're going to hear what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's start off by adding some filter over here. We're going to set the resonance down on this filter. We're going to start off by turning the cutoff up quite a bit. We want both of these oscillators to play through this filter. So we assign that by pressing oscillator 2 over here. And then you'll notice now that the sound is quite kind of bass heavy. So what I want to do is I want to run this filter through this filter. So we can enable it and then disable oscillator 2 here and enable filter 1. So now what that does is it basically passes this signal through to this filter, then through to the effects. So now what we can do is we can set this to high pass filter like this over at the top, and then we can turn the resonance down, and we want a bit of a sharper peak. So we go analog 24 dB, and then we can turn the cutoff down to somewhere around here, just so we're removing that really low frequency sounds. Cool. We're almost there. So now what we want to do is we want to apply a couple of effects just to accentuate the kind of motion that we're adding to the sound here. So I like to use distortion, let's say hard clip, and we want to run this almost all the way into the red. And here what we can do is we can actually turn down this volume to compensate for that a little bit, and we want to mix it down ever so slightly because we want a little bit of that dry signal coming through. So a little trick that I like to use to liven up the distortion sound is to add this chorus and freeze it. And so what that does is it basically just almost like a unison effect. It just adds some extra harmonics into the sound that kind of liven up the distortion sound a little bit. So I'm going to show you with and without this over here. But also another thing to note is we want to use this filter. This window here is basically like a filter for the chorus. We want to use this to remove the lows from the tails of the chorus, just so it doesn't kind of muddy up the low end of the sound. Cool. So let's listen to the sound with and without this chorus, and you'll notice that it kind of livens up that distortion. And if you don't like this specific tone that it gives, you can always just change these delay values over here to kind of change up the tone a bit. Okay, cool. So once we've set this up, what we can do is we can jump back here to this page, and now I want to show you the difference that this kind of detune parameter makes here. And it's cool because we still have this solid basis saw wave, which is not being detuned, that kind of gives us a kind of grounding to the sound, whereas the other voices just kind of add movement to that sound. So it doesn't really sound too detuned, which is pretty cool. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to start assigning some of these mod wheel parameters, but also something that I like to do is turn this bend down to 1, because now the pitch bend only bends up a semitone and down a semitone. So we can do a bit more of a kind of overall detune with the pitch bend if we want, and then we can assign the mod wheel to basically do like a bit of modulations on some of the other parameters. So here, if we assign the mod wheel to here, for example, this detune amount, then we can kind of play that amount. You see how you kind of get that movement by just playing with that mod wheel, which is really cool. So you may or may not want to set this to a mono legato, depending on how you're going to play the sound. If you're going to have these bendy notes that you don't want to overlap, especially with this distortion, you're going to want to set this to mono legato. Cool. Okay, so another thing we want to assign is the mod wheel to this cutoff parameter over here. And so that way we can kind of like open up the filter as at the same time as we're detuning the sound, and that's kind of what gives it that specific sound that we're after. Cool. And so that's about it for the patch in Vital. The rest is basically a little bit of wave shaping and some EQ and some reverbs. So here I actually took advantage of the new wave shapers in Bitwig. So Filter Plus basically is their kind of like new filter module, which has these wave shapers built in. So there's a variety of different types that you can choose, all with different types of characters. I'm not going to go too much into that. I'm just going to use this to kind of give it a little bit of extra grit. And see, when you combine that pitch bend, that like subtle pitch bend with that mod wheel movement, you get that really greasy kind of very techno-ish kind of sound. So, okay, here, now we just want to add a little bit of reverb. Okay, a lot of reverb. So here, I actually usually just have a bunch of send channels loaded in my project, so I'll just add some of that. But note that these reverbs are basically Valhalla Supermassive, which is a free reverb that you can download with a bit of kind of EQ and that kind of stuff on top. So yeah, that's about it. And let me show you the MIDI pattern. So the MIDI pattern is pretty simple. It's just like a series of notes and then kind of alternating octaves of these notes. So what I did here was I just kind of like duplicated a bunch of times and then just recorded myself playing with the mod wheel movement. And then the chops that I like the most, I kind of ended up just chopping those out, rendering them, and using those. So yeah, let's have a look at how I did that process. Okay, so one thing that I've just realized is that I forgot to change the envelopes. Specifically with these sounds where you have like these kind of repeating notes like this, you might want to have just a little bit of envelope on the sound. So let's reduce the sustain and decay just so that you can hear the transient of the sound a little bit more accented. So say for example, like I really like this chop that I made. Say for example, we like let it play a few times, record a bunch of them, and I like this one. Then I'll just chop out the rest of them, drop it into the clip launcher just as like a backup, and then we can just move it into the places that we need it. And it'll keep all of that modulation intact nicely for us. Yeah, that's nice, just to add a little bit of like variation in manually. Okay, so the rest is just a little bit of EQ to remove some of the low end. And that's about it. By the way, I recently put out a video on how I did the kick and bass for this track. It's not exactly the same. I kind of changed it a little bit for this part of the track. But if you want to know how to make this style of kick and bass, just check out that video. I'm going to post a link in the description, but there'll probably be a recommended thing on the sidebar for you as well. But yeah, I think that's about it. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you like this kind of style of music, you want to learn more sound design stuff, let me know in the comments so I know to make more of these kinds of tutorials. And yeah. Hope you enjoyed that. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. So I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.